This content is brought to you by Fisher Improvement Technologies Online, a learning platform that includes self-paced courses, knowledge sharing, and networking opportunities for safety, quality, and performance improvement professionals. Join now for free at online.improvewithfit.com.
This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Over 25 years helping leaders reducing errors and incidents. Here is your host of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, Rob Fisher.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher. And today we start a bit of a series on Leader Response Matters. We've been talking about this for a little while internally between us and our partners at Equilibria, and just how important it is that leaders respond instead of react. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between those two things, and that response happens to both success and failure, both successful or good outcomes and bad outcomes. So today, to kick this off with me, I've got Lewis Sr., the CEO of Equilibria, and a fascinating background in the e-colors. I'm going to let Lewis tell us just a little bit about himself. You've heard him on one of the podcasts quite a while back. Good friend and great colleague. So Lewis, just kind of introduce yourself. Tell everybody a little bit about how we got here.
Well, thank you, Rob. My name is Louis Sr. As Rob said, my e-colors are predominantly yellow-red. I have the privilege of being the CEO of Equilibria, a company we started back in 2004. I spent about 30 odd years in oil and gas before that. And actually now I think back on the business of leaders really do need to respond rather than react. I think of things that I've seen in the past where the leaders could seriously have responded differently than the way they did and got a much better outcome. Over the last few years, we've been working a lot around personality diversity and how that plays into everything around human organizational performance. Had the opportunity to meet Rob a few years ago. We immediately started to collaborate, and it's a collaboration that has just grown and grown ever since then. And really looking forward to this conversation because, especially in the environment we find ourselves today, it's probably even more important, not only for seasoned leaders, but also for young leaders who are just starting their careers.
So let's start off and just talk about what the difference between a reaction and a response is. Because, as we started working together to formulate advanced error reduction in organizations and how people manage their personality tendencies, that difference between a reaction and a response really became one of the keystones of how you get people to understand how they can manage those tendencies.
Well, I think the simplest way for us to probably try and understand it is, if you think of the iceberg as an analogy of a human being, the piece above the water, the visible part, if you like, that tends to represent our personality. And that's typically how we react, what you might call system one thinking, without any thought or much thought at all. Whatever comes instinctively to us, that typically comes from our personality. The larger piece of the iceberg below the water, that represents our character. And from there, we feel you probably get a much better opportunity to respond. And actually, if you look at it from an intentionality perspective, typically you get a better result when you respond rather than react.
Yeah, so there's some thought put into a response. And while we may think we think before we react, very often, even if we do think, the reaction itself just falls along personality tendency lines, or it may not be what's needed. So this whole thing about leader response matters is a big part of leadership, and it should be.
I think that's absolutely true. And as we've had the privilege of brainstorming this, particularly over the last few months, I think it's become more and more apparent, as you can well imagine. Again, like in every other aspect of our lives, our personalities very much will lead the way we typically react unless we think it through. And so when we're talking about leaders need to respond, it's not only to manage our own tendencies, but it's to keep in mind who the audience is at any one time. And I'm sure we're going to cover that, Rob, as we get into the five thoughts that we've come up with around this whole process.
Yeah, we've really been discussing about 5 major elements. And so let's just kick right into the first one. The first one is that you've got to try to pull yourself out of what we're calling autopilot. So what does that mean, pull yourself out of autopilot?
Well, if you think about however we naturally react, however we naturally go about whatever it is we're doing, that's what we would call autopilot. So let me give you an example, just maybe for those that don't understand a bit about the e-colors. So there's been 4 basic personality styles recognized for thousands of years. Let's just call it red, yellow, green, and blue. So the red tends to be action-oriented and very fast-paced. The green tends to be more of a thinker, typically likes analysis and likes data. The yellow, myself and yourself included, Rob, we tend to be more social, tend to like to engage and like to include others. And the blue in us, that relator or supporter side of us, that very much likes to understand why things are happening. So if we think about the autopilot, for me as a top color yellow, if something happens, my instinctive reaction is going to lead me to do certain behaviors, which may be completely different to that of somebody who's a top color red, a green, or a blue.
And it's also important to understand that all those are mixed up in all of us. There's not this line of separation between everything. So it's important that we're dealing with our autopilot, not the autopilot, but ours, right?
Yes, very much so. And so one of the things that we are advocating is, you might say, managing our autopilot by using what we call personal intervention, which is this pause and play button. So if my instinctive reaction is to jump into a situation that I don't fully understand, but the intention is to help, that can get me and others in a lot of trouble. So they have to manage that autopilot by pressing my pause button.
So, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you think of a scenario where a toppy color yellow, a socializer that wanted to, as a leader, would want to jump in to help someone, but that reaction would be the entirely the wrong thing to do?
Yes, very much so. And I'll give you a good example. If you think about any form of emergency response, for example, if you take it literally, let's say an emergency, so something's going very wrong, my instinct as a top color yellow may well literally to jump in and help, not knowing what the procedure is, not knowing what the process is, not even knowing what other people are supposed to be doing in that scenario. My natural instinct would be to go and help the person. Somebody who's a top color green would have probably a completely different reaction by making sure they knew exactly what it is they were going to do, got all the information before they needed, probably thought it through to a completely different level.
Yeah, so that autopilot is going to be unique to us. That's why pause and play. Pause when your instinct is to go do something immediately, you need to pause. When your instinct is to keep gathering, at some point you have to push play to get yourself to do something. So that we're going to try to use that element to get leaders to control or manage their autopilot, right?
I think the other side of it, Robert, when let's start with something bad happens, the natural instinct for some people, for example, top color yellow and a top color blue, is probably to make an emotional response. And that may well not be the response that needed. Conversely, somebody who's more predominantly red or green may make a completely non-emotional response, which may not actually satisfy the people immediately involved in the process who are looking for a bit of empathy. So understanding each one of those dynamics is extremely important.
Yeah, because if we just default that way, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and we react within our natural tendency, then we may actually be doing damage or harm to the individuals that are involved, as opposed to learning from the event, especially on the bad outcomes. We really want to make sure that we and the organization, the individuals, learn from these incidents or bad outcomes. On the other side of that, we want to make sure that we respond appropriately to good things that happen. So sometimes on autopilot, a couple of the personality types pay no attention at all to good things from other people. That's their job. That's what they were supposed to do. I'm not going to pat somebody on the back for doing something I pay them to do. On the other side, we may that was fantastic. That was great. The way you handled that thing, even though it was somebody's job or something they were supposed to do. So we have to manage those tendencies on both ends, the bad outcome and the good outcomes.
Yeah. And actually, we can learn just as much from a good outcome as we can from a bad outcome. And it's not just the outcome, as we well know. It's all of the planning, the strategy, the hard work, the effort that goes into that outcome that, really needs to be celebrated or needs to be looked into one way or the other. Yeah. But it is important to recognize both. And I think you make a great point, Rob, because I don't know, over the many years, and I'm sure like yourself, having been in oil and gas for all of my life, every time something bad happened, there was always going to be an incident, looking into an investigation. There was always going to be a lot of effort put into making sure that never happens again. But yet when something good or great happens, do we do as much effort to make sure we learn from what went well and make sure we do that again? So I think there's a lot to be said for making this balance between not only looking at response to a bad outcome, but also to a good outcome.
Right. And again, if we think it's the system that is involved in the failure when we have a bad outcome, why don't we give the system and the individuals credit when we have a good outcome and try to figure out, okay, what part of that system made this good? What part of the individual made this good? So that's an important element. The second element that we've been discussing is that you really have to remember who you're engaging with. That it may not be it ain't about you. It may be about the individual or individuals or groups that you're engaging with.
Yeah. This is again, as we were talking through this, when we started to consider this whole business of response matters, this is really important. I mean, the simple things are like, remember your audience, so obviously, depending on who you're talking to, what level they are in their own journeys, what level they are in an organization, can make a huge difference. And I'm sure I've seen leaders who can make a brilliant speech, to the street, or get on one of the financial programs first thing in the morning on the television, make exactly the same speech to people who are working on the shop floor, and it goes right over the head. And it's just not fair. So it's up to the leader to make that intentional response that they're giving the right information at the right level to the right people, and then add in from an e-collar perspective. So if people tend to be highly independent, they're obviously, we're going to talk about engagement and how important that is, even how close they stand next to somebody, or people want the distance, etc. All of these things need to be taken in terms of great leadership.
Yeah, and I think also we need to make leaders aware that the system or the individual conditions matter for that engagement as well. In other words, were they part of the crew that was involved in a fatality? Are they part of the system that was engaged in the bad or good outcome? And that you have to gauge how you engage on those things as well. So you very well said it. It's not just about the personality tendencies. It's about the conditions under which this engagement is going to happen. Are you okay? Are they okay? What do you need from me? Have we restored the system and the people in a way that we've normalized a little bit? Those are all parts of that engagement.
Very much so. And actually, if you think about the current situation, I've just been reading an article this morning about the whole business of going back to work or going back into the office after so many people have been working remotely, and the way different companies and organizations are actually reacting or responding. depending on how they've chosen, the leadership have chosen to take it forward, is quite astounding, actually. And I think this is a great example of people having to adjust their what style that they may have thought was normal or quite acceptable a couple of years ago may well not be acceptable today. And so this is very dynamic, I think even in today's situation.
So number 3 kind of ties into exactly what you're saying, is you can't really respond well unless you engage well. So what do we mean? What's the difference between engaging and an observation, or just a walk around, or a management by stumbling through? What's the difference between those things?
Well, if you think about a lot of people in the past, with lots of different organizations, if they had some form of behavioral-based safety program in place, for example, the leader would kind of tick the box by, oh, when I get to this particular work site, I'll go ahead and fill a card in. In other words, they may well watch somebody working and fill some kind of information about what they saw. If they were comfortable watching human beings, some people would much rather say, oh, the handrail's bent, a piece of equipment, then you never have to have a conversation. Again, those days, yeah, exactly. Those days are over for leaders. So if you're engaging, if you're actually doing value-based engagements where, of course, you're having to listen, and then you're having to engage with the person about whatever it is that's important to them and important to you. And I think that it's a skill set that still needs a lot of work for a lot of people, because for some people, it's a tremendous effort to engage in that kind of more empathetic conversation. And everything we've seen on every company survey we've been involved in the last 2 years, what people are looking for right now is another level of empathy.
Yeah.
And so the response and how you do that is going to be key, Rob.
And would you say that some of the personality types are naturally more empathetic and some of the personality types are less naturally empathetic? In other words, it's a struggle each way?
Yes. Well, as you well know, for people from an e-colors perspective, people who are more predominantly red and green tend to be less empathetic than people who are predominantly yellow or blue. Not right or wrong, but significantly different. However, if anybody wants a word of advice, and we see this every day, for those who are task-oriented, if you take on the task of being empathetic, even though it doesn't come naturally, you can get very good at it.
Yeah, so you can use your strengths and potential limiters to actually take on the task of managing your tendencies. You can take that on as a task, and maybe the other side takes that on as a personal development attribute. Here's how I can get better. What number 4 is, what do you think leader knowledge, language, and behaviors, does it start there, or does it start with the field demanding some change?
Well, in a perfect world, it would be the leaders seeing for themselves, regardless of, again, I go back to the fact that there's a lot of people being put into leadership positions, again, through natural attrition in many types of different companies today. A lot of people have retired, they've moved on, they've taken early retirement, and so the leadership positions are being filled. And lots of times, just to put it in perspective, those leaders have come from people who actually were technically very sound. In fact, predominantly individual contributors of one form or another. And then one day said, oh, congratulations, we're promoting you, going to be a leader. And they go, hey, I didn't sign up to be a leader. I didn't go to university to learn how to be a leader. Yeah, but you're going to be a leader. So guess what? How do they then start to work out what do they need to do? Well, most people will very quickly roll back. What experience have they had to date with a leader they either liked the way they worked or they didn't like the way they worked? I'll follow that and I won't do that. In today's world, it's really important that the leader is, first of all, open to learning, be it through coaching, teaching, however they take in their information. The more knowledge they gain, that will significantly change their language. And from that language will become a new set of behaviors. And interestingly enough, I would say of the companies that we work with, when the advocacy for HOP or even HP back in the day, for a lot of leaders, the first big lesson was around engagement. It was actually listening to their people. Now, have people in the field been asking for that for a long time, Rob? Yes, absolutely. Have they been heard to the way they have been heard today? I don't think so.
Right.
And so, but what I do think is, as the leaders learn to respond, and they'll see very quickly they're getting a much better outcome and getting a better connection with their people, productivity goes up, and all of the things you want to happen start to happen.
So I love that you've used the word and the term listen quite a lot. And I think one of the reasons why we talk about engagement is that because there's some people that are not outwardly giving in their communication. So telling a leader just to go out and listen to a group of people that don't provide that communication, that's not going to be enough. You have to engage those folks. You can't just say you need to go out and listen to people, because there's a whole group of people that don't have anything to say unless they are led there by some type of engagement.
No, absolutely. And so, believe it or not, one of the things that we offer, and actually it's very nicely put into this process, is we talk a little bit about planned engagement tools, because for some people, making an engagement can be more difficult than building a rocket. You know, you've heard all this before, but it's true. For a lot of people, this is a learned skill, but very easy to understand once you get the basics of it. Let me just say this, because I hope there'll be a lot of people listening to this who work in industry. It has always blown my mind that, and I've coached leaders all over the world. We go to a site, they choose the most noisy piece of equipment, be it an engine, be it a giant extraction fan, an exhaust fan, stand right underneath it and have their engagement. That really is not the way to do it. In fact, I would always offer to anybody who's learning for the first time how to engage, find a handrail, stand next to it, and let the people come to you and don't move. They will find their own space. They will get where they're comfortable, and then you can start to have the engagement.
So that's
and if you're somebody who's very, sorry, Rob, I was going to say, and if it's somebody who's very, you're task oriented, don't immediately ask the other person, what are you doing? Before you've even told them who you are, what their name is, or anything else. So there's a sequence of very simple lessons you can learn in how to engage effectively.
And that's a great point, because we're back to leader knowledge, leader language, and leader behaviors. And I think that most people take those, what they think are simple things, for granted. And you know, the leader knowledge of the past was all engagement should be on the floor, which means that I should come to you at your noisy machine and have the conversation there. Well, what if I'm providing a distraction? What if I'm taking away, what if somebody doesn't like somebody looking over their shoulder, whether they're there to engage or to observe or to just be there? So that piece about planned engagements is vital, and that's a piece of leader knowledge that can then lead to how we talk about it differently and how we do it differently.
I would fully agree with that. In fact, I think for those people who have got the opportunity to do this, I would highly recommend the following. So if you're a leader, making sure that you use something like the planned engagement ahead of time, I would actually take somebody with you who's comfortable to give you feedback. So for example, the leader's walking across the shop floor or whatever, and they're going to go and talk to probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the floor, which can be the janitor. In Thailand, I will never forget going into a factory, and I was teaching people how to engage, and virtually all day people were going to the leaders of each group, the mini groups, and everybody kept walking past this guy who just continually sweeping the floor. And towards the end of the day, everybody said, Lewis, you know, you're the expert here. Show us how to do an engagement the way you would do it. And we're in Thailand. I don't speak Thai, but we had a Thai translator. I said, let's go and talk to the guy sweeping the floor. And they said, I thought you were going to talk to a VIP. I said, he is a VIP. He's probably been here longer than anybody else who works at this facility. He's watched you all walk all around him all day long and never ever speak to him. We went engaged with the guy, and it was the most fantastic engagement I've seen in a long time. Why? Because he felt that he mattered just like everybody else. And the other key was I had told the people I was with my objectives for going to have this engagement are as follows. So we had the engagement with the help of somebody translating. Immediately after the engagement was over, we stepped back and we debriefed the engagement. What was the objective? What went well? What could I do better next time? What were any lessons learned? Bang, and we're on to the next engagement. And so if you are a leader who is able to do that, let's say over a day, your engagements just get more and more and more effective as the day goes on. And whoever you're getting to give the feedback has learned from you as well, which is another way, to help them on the journey as well, Rob.
And you won't really know if your language and behaviors have changed to incorporate the new knowledge unless somebody else that knew you before was there with you. So you can help each other. I know when we go in to do senior leader workshops, one of the things we tell them at the end is, we want you to go out and try this, but we also want you to try to hold each other accountable for using the tools that you've learned. And in order to do that, you have to walk the walk. You've got to talk the talk. You've got to use the new knowledge and language to generate new behaviors and talk about that amongst yourselves. Well, a way to do that is in the beginning to use these new philosophies to engage and have somebody there that's with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 5 is that in the end, really, it's leaders have to effectively respond to both successes and failures. And that response matters. It's kind of the wrap up. So why do you think we need to respond effectively to both success and failure?
Well, first of all, if you don't respond effectively, you can do a lot of damage very quickly. And there's been some great historical mistakes, over the years where people have literally said the wrong thing in the wrong moment, and it's completely ruined their career and actually even impacted their company's share value. I mean, a great example was the CEO of BP standing on the dockside in Louisiana post Macondo. How had he been there? Probably 4 or 5 days, probably up to here with everything that was going on. And the reporter sticks a microphone in his face and says, what are you thinking? He said, I just want my life back. And that was the end of his career right there. Yeah. Had he responded in a different way, maybe in a completely different outcome. Having said that, it happens on a daily basis. It happens around the dinner table at home. How often do we react? Especially if we've got teenage kids maybe. And then, shouldn't have said that. It could be just that simple. I think it is important for a lot of, if you go back a few years and depending on the maturity of an organization, the natural reaction to something going wrong was immediately to go into this who tree, who did it? What did you do with them? Or the whole blame culture thing. What we're talking about here, what you described before, Rob, is obviously leaning towards the just culture, which is a whole different perspective. That for a lot of organization is a huge shift. It's almost a change in the pendulum swing to the other side. I think it's just as important for leaders to respond when things go well, because there's so many people doing so much hard work every day. And you're obviously very familiar what's going on in the States right now. I read an article this morning, 72% of the workforce are either quitting or thinking about quitting. And you know what? People don't leave companies, people leave people. So you have to think, how much of an impact are the leadership at any level in the organization having on that number?
Well, if you think about that, one of the things that has been missing in the last year and a half is engagement.
Absolutely.
I mean, if they leave people and there are no people around, we're kind of left to our own devices. I mean, you and I have struggled with this because we had a lot of interface, a lot of face-to-face interface. We had flown halfway around the world to spend time with each other for that engagement lift that we got. When that was impossible, it also impacted the way we engaged and how often we engaged and what we engaged on. So I think we've got to engaging on success, engaging when things go well, will get everybody back into the realm of engagement, right?
Yeah. Totally
Because
agree.
there's, like as you well said, there's way more opportunity to engage on success than there is on failure, and it's hard to blow a success engagement. You blow a failure engagement, it blows a lot of things. But you can pretty much repair and learn from a not well done success engagement. Even in some of your examples, it's hard to recover from a bad failure related engagement.
Yep. Yeah. And what I'm really excited about as we go down this road is, as you well know, we spent a lot of time looking at how different personalities respond, knowing their own reactions to what would be considered a bad outcome, and even knowing what their reactions are to what would be considered a good outcome. As you said before, for some people, they almost blow it off. That's what you're paid to do and ready to move on. So I think this is an ideal time, actually, in the state that the world is in today. I've been talking to supply chain people most of the day today. There are shortages of all kinds of things that I frankly had no idea. This knock-on effect is going to go on for a long, long time. Now, I'll give you one quick example. I wanted to buy an Apple TV app this morning for our television. You're going to wait 3 months, no parts. Who'd have thought of that?
Right.
A couple of years ago. So there is a heightened level of need for people to feel engaged with whatever it is they're interested in today, be it anything around climate change. If you watch what's going on in Glasgow this week, there's all kind of promises being made. It'd be really interesting to see if the leaders are really thinking this through from that perspective. So I think it's an ideal time for people to really have a good look at themselves. Question, do they know enough about this, or is there more to learn? And I think, Rob, what we've collectively put together, I think, is a beautiful opportunity for people to learn, frankly.
Yeah, because it's, and to kind of start wrapping up, it's not enough just to tell leaders that their response matters. It's not enough. We have to say who needs to do it, how that needs to happen, why it needs to happen that way. What are some of the important elements of leaders responding? And so I think we're taking that next step to try and understand some of the who, what, how, and why of that one element, of that one guiding principle of HOP, leader response matters. And how do companies do that? Lewis, I really appreciate you joining me on the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast this morning. I know you're busy like crazy over there in Spain, trying to work all over the world virtually, and hopefully, we can get together again soon. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about or you want to discuss before we close out?
No, I just want to say thank you again. We decided to start collaborating this not that long ago, and it was amazing to me how quickly, again, because we all engaged from different parts of the world to pull it together. It didn't take long to come up with, I think, is going to be a big help to a lot of people, both small and larger organizations, if you think this through. So I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how it plays out. And as you well know, you'll have my full support. Thank you.
You as well. All right. Well, again, I'm Rob Fisher. Welcome to another round of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. We hope you enjoyed it with myself and Lewis Sr. And remember, intentional leadership starts with you.